I'm here with John Ramdine and Robin Black. Of course, on Saturday night, the UFC is in Vancouver, which Carlos Condit returning to Vancouver, where in 2010, he defeated the outgoing Rory MacDonald, who it looks like he has found a new home, and it's expected that he will finalize his agreement with Bellator. As we saw, he was taken off the UFC rankings, which typically is the last move before someone is about to move on, and was apparently informed that Bellator has made you an offer, we are not going to be matching it, and you are free to go. Are you surprised by this maneuver, and what does this do to the Bellator welterweight division?
Yeah, I'm surprised, yes, because when you look at the UFC's welterweight division and some of the top guys at 170 pounds, they're all 30 years old or over 30 years old. Yes, Rory MacDonald is coming off those losses against Stephen Thompson and Robbie Lawler, but Stephen Thompson's just a different animal. I don't know how many people are going to be able to look good against Stephen Thompson moving forward, but so a loss to Stephen Thompson really doesn't mean anything. You have that fight with Robbie Lawler, one of the greatest fights in recent memory, but yes, there are 2 losses in a row, but there's so much upside. There is a future with Rory MacDonald.
He just turned 27 last year.
Just turned 27, and a lot of these guys, as we pointed out, Robbie, Stephen Thompson, Johnny Hendricks, are all in their 30s. So I'm surprised that the UFC didn't hold on to this guy looking at the future. But this is huge for Bellator. Yes, the goal is to get some of the hottest free agents out there. They went and got Ben Henderson. They picked up Matt Mitrione. But I think based on the stuff I've been reading on social media, everybody is stunned by this. UFC fighters, they're like, wow, this is a big deal when somebody at this level decides to go to Bellator.
Is this bigger than Benson Henderson?
I think it is bigger than Benson Henderson.
I think it's way bigger.
Especially for the fans, because you look at all the different possible matchups for Rory MacDonald in Bellator. You have Paul Daly, who's already said, come on, let's make this a fight, because Bellator promised me big fights. A fight with Rory MacDonald's a big fight.
Andre Koreshkov
would be a big fight. Douglas Lima would be a huge fight for him. If Ben Henderson decided to go back up to 170 pounds, that's a big fight, so you can understand why this could be attractive for Rory MacDonald.
When you're looking at this kind of business, you got to sometimes realize, well, we don't have all the information and we're not experts, and maybe there's some experts out there. And I like to read this guy. I don't read a lot of different mixed martial arts stuff if it's not technical, but there's a guy named Matt Connolly over at Forbes. I kind of have a feeling that Forbes knows a little something about business, and he tends to have some really valuable insights into this one. And quite a while back, maybe 6 months ago, he was looking at the landscape and saying, let's just say John Ramdine is Bellator and John Pollock is the UFC. If you two have similar amounts of resources and money available, but one of you has much of the talent, it'll be nearly impossible for that one to keep it all, because the other guy has a lot of money and they're trying to pull it there. So you have the right to match, so you have to be selective of where you can do it. You'd want to, the UFC, when people are like, why would they give up Rory MacDonald? Don't they want him? Don't they realize how good he is? The reality is you can only keep so many of them financially. You don't have the budget to keep them all. So somebody you gotta let go. And it's sad to see this as the somebody, because in the middle of it, we're like, but what about us, the fans? I want to see him fight the very best guys in the world. You named 2 awesome fights. I can't wait to see those. And then what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, then what? It would be, you have to go and either build your own talent, and that's the thing that Coker, he has relationships with some of the top gyms, certainly in California, where initially Strikeforce was based. So whether it be Alliance or AKA or some of those teams, you're trying to get the next crop of 170-pound fighters to develop. And then you mentioned trying to bring in free agents. I mean, apparently Donald Cerrone still has 1 fight left on his contract, even though he said that after this fight, he's going to be free and clear. But you would imagine this is another guy that Bellator would be going after. But the word was that Rory was offered, this was months ago that we heard from one of Rory's teammates, that Bellator had offered him $500,000. Now, again, we don't know if this is an actual figure, but if you look at the payouts from the UFC in Ottawa, it's disclosed that Rory made $60,000 because he didn't defeat Stephen Thompson. Are those real numbers? Well, we know that there's bonuses that are handed out that we do not see. So we don't know the exact dollar amount, but if it is $500,000, that Rory MacDonald was offered, you could understand why he would go
Well, you
there.
can understand the whole picture. If a company has this much money and a lot of new offers are going to come in, and they can only match some of them, and then one of them is huge, and that guy just had a baby. That guy is entering a different era of his career, so it kind of makes sense. It's exciting for Bellator. It's exciting for Rory MacDonald if the numbers are true. It's kind of sad for the fans because unless there are new fighters that come in there, there's 2 real fights to be excited about so far, but it all starts with 1 or 2 big signings.
These are key issues that you raise, Robin, because as we see this is, if I'm a fighter, I'm ecstatic over this. This ability that Bellator is going to pay this, the end result is Rory's going to get a bump in pay. And this is artificially going to bring up, to me, the fighters' pay in all of this. Same thing with a fighters' union. If we see that actually play out, great that the fighters are going to have more rights here, but if you're a fan at home and you don't care about these issues, these are things that you have to look at. That the fact that you're not going to have all your fighters in one specific promotion, and that you may have to deal with a unionized version of the sport with fighters bandying together. And therefore, if you're a fan, like this way that the UFC has constructed their business, it's very fan friendly. And the fighters putting together a lot of this stuff and finally having some of their bargaining being utilized, it's not necessarily the best for a fan that just wants to see the best guys fight the best guys.
True, but at the same time, competition is good, and competition forces.
I'm all for this.
And when you look at it, it's going to be difficult to compete with the UFC because they have the bulk of the talent. They have 80%, 90%, 95% of the best fighters on the planet. But what Bellator is doing, I don't know if they're concerned with being the #1 organization. They want to be a viable #2 promotion with the idea
that should be the goal.
That should be the goal.
We are not going to become the UFC. We want to be a profitable entity attached to Viacom that puts on big fights. We're not in the pay-per-view business, and we're going to attract people. I would say profitability. That is your goal if you're Bellator. Don't even worry about the competition.
Exactly.
And if people become available and it makes sense in your budget, go after them.
And that's exactly it. You're just there to give the fans a good product. And again, if you look at Coker's history, the guy knows how to put on great fights. However, it still doesn't feel to me, I don't know if it feels that way to you or you, that this Bellator product looks like Scott Coker's previous products.
Well, sometimes a company, or you only have so much influence, whatever your role is in the company. There's other people in there. There's other people above you. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. Just do a couple of Google searches about Viacom themselves. They're in turmoil. It's really interesting. And this, if people wonder with the UFC being sold, people are, well, what's going to change? And people always think of huge changes. But when you go and you're a big, complex company, whether that is the UFC or Viacom, huge changes at the top have very little effect on the things underneath them because you bought a $4 billion company. If you make 1 or 2 changes you don't understand, you just turned it into a $3 billion company. But a lot of crazy stuff going on. The world of corporate business and corporate competition is its own weird universe. Once you start unlocking some of this stuff, it can be fascinating.
Last thing before we wrap up, it is interesting the timing of all this, that the UFC is preparing for a card in Canada this weekend and losing
in Vancouver
a major Canadian fighter in Rory MacDonald. Now, Rory was not able to replicate what George St. Pierre could do for this market. I don't think anybody could. That's not a fair, comparison. But with Rory MacDonald going to Bellator, does that give them a bit of an inroads in Canada? Do you see Rory MacDonald being able to make that kind of a difference?
I mean, who knows? Do people in Canada, do they know about the Bellator product? Is this something that they tune into? Now, if the goal is we're here for the long haul, we're hoping that Rory MacDonald will help us establish the Bellator brand and be the #2 organization where people say this is the place that we need to be. So it all depends.
All right, that's going to do it for us. We are back on Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time with our preview show of the UFC card coming your way from Vancouver, featuring Carlos Condit and Damian Maia in the welterweight main event.